In the quiet suburban neighborhoods, where manicured lawns meet picture-perfect homes, secrets often hide behind closed doors and smiling facades. Sometimes the most innocent among us become silent guardians of truths too heavy for their small shoulders to bear. When desperation meets silence, and when a child's vigil becomes the only barrier between hidden horrors and discovery, the arrival of an outsider can shatter the fragile balance that keeps a family's darkest moments buried. This is a story of such a moment, where curiosity opens doors that were meant to stay closed, and where the truth demands to be heard through the eyes of those who cannot yet speak it. Maya Restrepo checked her phone for the third time as she walked up the cobblestone pathway to 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes early, just as her mother had always taught her. The Richardson house loomed before her, a pristine colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch that looked like it belonged in a home magazine. Everything about the neighborhood screamed upper-middle-class perfection, from the identical mailboxes to the strategically placed garden gnomes. At 21, Maya had been babysitting since she was 15, working her way through college one evening at a time. She'd seen it all: tantrum-throwing toddlers, sneaky teenagers, houses that looked perfect from the outside but fell apart the moment you stepped inside. But something about this job felt different. Maybe it was the way Mrs. Richardson's voice had trembled slightly over the phone, or how she'd emphasized multiple times that Emma was a very special little girl who needed extra patience. The front door opened before Maya could ring the bell. Carol Richardson stood in the doorway, her auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun that made her pale face look even more drawn than it probably was. She wore a black cocktail dress that looked expensive, but hung on her frame like she'd recently lost weight. "Maya, thank you so much for coming," Carol said, stepping aside to let her in. "I hope you didn't have trouble finding the place." "Not at all, Mrs. Richardson. GPS these days makes everything easy." Maya stepped into the foyer, immediately struck by how quiet the house felt. Most homes with children had background noise, TVs, music, the general chaos of family life. This house felt almost sterile in its silence. "Please call me Carol." "David," she called up the carpeted staircase. "Maya's here." Heavy footsteps echoed from above, and David Richardson appeared at the top of the stairs. He was a tall man with graying temples, and the kind of tan that came from weekend golf games rather than actual outdoor work. His smile seemed forced as he descended the stairs, adjusting his tie. "Maya, wonderful to meet you. Carol's told me great things about your references." His handshake was firm but brief, and Maya noticed his eyes didn't quite meet hers. "Emma's upstairs in her room. She's going through a phase right now." "What kind of phase?" Maya asked, setting her backpack down by the door. Carol and David exchanged a look that lasted just a fraction too long. "She's been very quiet lately," Carol said finally. "Since her sister moved away for college, she's had a hard time adjusting. Sometimes she just stands in her room for long periods." "That's not unusual for kids dealing with separation anxiety," Maya said. "How long has her sister been gone?" Another look between the parents. "About 6 months," David said. "Emma was very close to Sophie. They shared that room for years before Sophie left for school." Maya nodded. "I have a younger brother. When I left for college, he went through something similar. It just takes time." "Exactly." Carol's relief was palpable. "Emma might not talk much tonight. She's not being rude. She's just processing things in her own way. There's sandwich fixings in the fridge if she gets hungry, though she probably won't eat much. Her bedtime is 8:30, but don't worry if she stays up a little later. Just make sure she's in her room." "We should be back by 11, David added, checking his watch. "Anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin. First time we've been out together in months." "Congratulations," Maya said. 20 years. 15, Carol corrected quickly. 15 wonderful years. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. They led Maya through the house, pointing out the kitchen, the living room, and the powder room downstairs. Everything was immaculate. Throw pillows perfectly arranged, not a single item out of place. It felt more like a model home than a place where people actually lived. "Emma!" Carol called up the stairs. "Come meet Maya." They waited in the foyer, but no sound came from upstairs. "She's probably in her room," David said, loosening his collar slightly. "Emma, we're leaving soon." Still nothing. "I'll go get her," Carol said, starting up the stairs. Maya followed, curious to meet the child she'd be watching for the evening. The upstairs hallway was lined with family photos, vacation shots, school pictures, Christmas mornings. Maya noticed that many of the newer photos seemed to be missing someone. There were gaps on the wall where frames had obviously been removed, leaving behind faint rectangular outlines on the paint. Carol stopped in front of a door painted soft pink with a wooden nameplate that read Emma and Sophie in curly script. Someone had scratched out Sophie with what looked like a house key. "Emma, honey, Maya's here to spend the evening with you while Daddy and I go out for dinner." Carol pushed open the door, and Maya stepped into what had clearly once been a shared bedroom. Two twin beds sat against opposite walls, one perfectly made with a pink comforter, the other stripped bare with just a mattress. The walls were covered with typical little girl decorations, butterfly stickers, a growth chart, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. But like the hallway, there were obvious gaps where posters or pictures had been removed. And there, in the far corner of the room, stood Emma. Maya's first thought was how small she looked. 8 years old, with long brown hair that needed brushing and wearing a faded purple nightgown despite it being dinner time. But what struck Maya most was Emma's absolute stillness. The little girl stood facing the closet door, her back to the room, completely motionless except for the slight rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed. "Emma," Carol said, her voice taking on a forced cheerfulness. "This is Maya. She's going to stay with you tonight." Emma didn't move, didn't acknowledge that anyone had spoken. Maya approached slowly, the way she might approach a spooked animal. "Hi, Emma. I'm Maya. I like your room. Those are really cool glow-in-the-dark stars." Nothing. "She's been like this all day," Carol whispered to Maya. "Just standing there. She'll move if she needs to use the bathroom or if I bring her food, but then she goes right back to that spot." Maya studied Emma's position. The little girl stood about 3 feet from the closet door, her hands at her sides staring straight ahead. The closet door was closed, but Maya could see it wasn't completely flush. There was a thin line of darkness visible along the bottom edge. "What's she looking at?" Maya asked quietly. "We don't know," David said from the doorway, making Maya jump slightly. She hadn't heard him come upstairs. "She won't talk about it. Won't talk about much of anything lately." Maya moved to Emma's side, crouching down to try to see what might be capturing the child's attention. From Emma's eye level, the closet door looked perfectly ordinary, white painted wood with a brass knob, but there was something about the way Emma stared at it, with such intensity and focus, that made Maya's skin prickle. "Emma," Maya said softly, "can you tell me what you're looking at?" For the first time, Emma's head turned slightly. Not toward Maya, but as if she were listening to something. Then, barely audible, she whispered, "She's still in there." "What?" Maya leaned closer. "What did you say?" But Emma had already turned back to face the closet, resuming her vigil. Carol's face went white. She sometimes says things like that about Sophie. She misses her sister terribly." "Of course she does," Maya said, though something felt off about the explanation. The way Emma had said she's still in there didn't sound like a child missing an absent sibling. It sounded like a child who believed someone was actually present. "We really should go," David said, checking his watch again. "Our reservation is at 7:30, and traffic into the city can be unpredictable." Carol nodded, though she looked reluctant to leave. She knelt beside Emma and kissed the top of her head. "Mommy and Daddy will be back later tonight, sweetheart. Maya's going to take good care of you." Emma didn't respond. "There's pizza money on the kitchen counter," Carol told Maya as they headed back downstairs, "and our numbers are on the refrigerator. Call if you need anything at all." "What about bedtime?" Maya asked. "Should I try to get her to brush her teeth and change clothes?" "Don't force it," David said quickly. "If she cooperates, great. If not, just let her be. Tomorrow's Saturday, so it's not like she has school." They gathered their coats and keys, and Maya walked them to the door. Through the window, she watched their BMW pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street. Then she was alone in the too-quiet house with a little girl who spent her days staring at a closet door. Maya climbed the stairs again, her footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Emma hadn't moved. She stood in exactly the same position, like a statue in a museum. "Hey, Emma," Maya said, settling into a chair near the window. "I brought some books if you want me to read to you. Or we could watch a movie downstairs." No response. Maya tried a different approach. "I have a little brother about your age. His name is Carlos. When I went away to college, he used to sit in my room for hours just looking at my stuff. He missed me so much that he couldn't bear to leave." Emma's shoulders seemed to tense slightly, but she didn't turn around. "Is that what you're doing? Missing Sophie?" This time Emma's head tilted just a fraction, as if she were considering the question. Then, in that same barely audible whisper, "She can't leave." A chill ran down Maya's spine. "What do you mean she can't leave?" But Emma had gone silent again. Maya spent the next hour trying different strategies. She offered food, suggested games, even tried putting on music to see if that would break Emma's trance-like state. Nothing worked. The little girl remained fixed in place, staring at the closet with an intensity that was becoming increasingly unsettling. As 8 o'clock approached, Maya decided to explore the house a bit more. Maybe understanding Emma's environment would give her some insight into the child's behavior. She started with the other bedrooms. There were 4 total, including what appeared to be a master suite and a guest room. One room was clearly used as a home office, with a computer desk and filing cabinets. But it was the bathroom that made Maya pause. The counter had 2 toothbrushes, 2 sets of hair products, and what looked like medications for a teenage girl. Acne treatment, vitamins, even a retainer case with Sophie written on it in purple marker. If Sophie had left for college 6 months ago, why were all her personal items still here? Maya returned to Emma's room to find the little girl in exactly the same position. The sun had set and the room was growing dark, but Emma continued her vigil by the light filtering in from the hallway. "Emma, are you getting tired? It's almost bedtime." No response. Maya approached the closet, thinking maybe if she could understand what Emma was staring at, she could help break the spell. But as she got closer, Emma suddenly spoke. "Don't." The word was sharp, urgent, and louder than anything Emma had said all evening. Maya froze. "Don't what?" "Don't open it." "The closet? Why not?" Emma finally turned around, and Maya gasped. The little girl's face was streaked with tears, not fresh ones, but the kind that had been falling and drying for hours. Her eyes were wide and frightened, and she looked much older than her 8 years. "She doesn't like it when people open the door," Emma whispered. "She gets upset." Maya's heart was racing now. "Who gets upset, Emma? Sophie?" Emma nodded slowly. "She's waiting for Mommy and Daddy to tell the truth." "What truth?" But Emma had already turned back to face the closet, resuming her watch. Maya backed away, her mind spinning. Every instinct told her that something was very wrong in this house. The missing photos, the parents' nervous behavior, Emma's strange fixation on the closet, and now this talk about Sophie waiting for the truth. It all pointed to something much more serious than simple separation anxiety. She pulled out her phone and considered calling the Richardsons, but what would she say? That their daughter was acting strangely. They'd already warned her about that. That Emma claimed her sister was in the closet? They'd probably chalk it up to childhood imagination. Maya decided to wait until the parents returned. She'd ask more direct questions about Sophie, about when exactly she'd left, and why so many of her belongings were still in the house. There had to be a logical explanation. But as the evening wore on and Emma maintained her vigil, Maya found herself staring at the closet door too. There was something about it that drew the eye, made you want to look closer. The thin line of darkness at the bottom seemed to pulse in her peripheral vision. Several times she could have sworn she heard something from inside, a rustling like fabric against wood, or the soft sound of breathing. By 10 o'clock, Maya's nerves were shot. Emma had been standing in the same spot for over 3 hours, occasionally whispering things like, "I'm still here and I won't leave you," to the closet door. Maya had tried everything she could think of to distract the child, but nothing worked. Finally, she made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She was going to open that closet door. Maybe there was something inside that would explain Emma's behavior, old clothes that still smelled like Sophie, or mementos that the child associated with her missing sister. Maybe seeing that the closet contained nothing but normal childhood belongings would help Emma move past whatever was keeping her frozen in place. Maya waited until Emma seemed to be in one of her deeper trances, staring straight ahead without blinking. Then she crept toward the closet, her hand reaching for the brass knob. "Emma," she whispered, "I'm just going to take a quick look, okay? Just to see what's inside." Emma's body went rigid. "No," she breathed. "Please don't. She's not ready." But Maya was already turning the knob. The door swung open with a soft creak, and Maya's world exploded into nightmare. The smell hit Maya first, a sickly sweet odor that made her stomach lurch and her eyes water. It was the smell of flowers left too long in stagnant water, mixed with something else she couldn't identify, but that made every instinct scream at her to run. But it was what she saw that would forever be burned into her memory. Sophie Richardson hung in the back of the closet, suspended by a leather belt looped around the closet rod. Her body was partially mummified, preserved by the dry air that had circulated through the small space for months. She wore the same clothes from her last school photo, a blue sweater and dark jeans, now hanging loose on her deteriorated frame. Her long brown hair, so similar to Emma's, fell forward to partially obscure her face, but Maya could see enough to know that this wasn't suicide. The belt was positioned wrong, too high on the neck. Sophie's hands weren't positioned naturally, and there were what looked like ligature marks on her wrists, barely visible beneath fabric bracelets that someone had carefully placed there. Most telling of all, there were items arranged around Sophie's feet like offerings. Fresh flowers that couldn't have been more than a few days old, a glass of water, and a note in childish handwriting that read, "I'm sorry I couldn't help you." Maya's scream caught in her throat as the full horror of the scene registered. This wasn't a suicide that the family was covering up. This was a murder scene that had been carefully staged, and someone had been maintaining it for months. Behind her, Emma's voice was calm, almost relieved. "Now you know why I can't leave her alone." Maya spun around, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Emma stood in the same spot she'd occupied for hours, but now she was looking directly at Maya instead of at the closet. "Emma," Maya whispered, her voice barely working. How long have you known?" "Since the night it happened," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I was sleeping, but I heard them fighting. Sophie was yelling at Daddy about something she found in his computer. Then it got quiet, and then Mommy started crying." Maya's mind raced. She needed to get Emma out of the house immediately, needed to call the police, needed to... "They didn't mean to hurt her," Emma continued, as if she were discussing the weather. "Daddy just grabbed her too hard when she tried to run away. Her neck made a funny sound and then she stopped moving." The casual way Emma described her sister's death made Maya's blood freeze. "Emma, we need to leave. Right now. We need to call someone." "I tried," Emma said sadly. "The first night I tried to call 911, but Daddy took my phone away. He said if I told anyone, they'd take me away from Mommy and put her in jail. He said Sophie was already dead, and telling wouldn't bring her back, but it would destroy our family." Maya stared at this 8-year-old child who had been carrying the weight of her sister's murder for 6 months. "Emma, that's not true. Your parents, they killed Sophie, and they've been making you keep their secret. That's not fair to you." "I know," Emma said simply, "but Sophie's scared to be alone. When I'm not here watching, she gets cold. Sometimes I hear her crying." Maya realized with growing horror that Emma had been bringing the flowers, the water, the notes. This little girl had been tending to her sister's corpse like a shrine, believing she was taking care of Sophie's spirit. "Emma, Sophie isn't scared anymore," Maya said gently, fighting back tears. "Sophie can't feel cold or lonely. What you've been doing, standing guard, bringing her things, that's because you love her, but she doesn't need you to do that anymore." Emma's composure finally cracked. "But if I leave, who will take care of her? Mommy and Daddy pretend she never existed. They took down all her pictures and packed away her things. They tell people she went to college, but she's right here, and nobody talks to her anymore except me." Maya's heart shattered. She knelt down in front of Emma, careful not to look back at the closet. "Emma, I'm going to take care of this now. I'm going to make sure Sophie gets the help she needs, and I'm going to make sure you're safe. Are you going to call the police?" "Yes," Emma nodded solemnly. "Will they arrest Mommy and Daddy?" Maya couldn't lie to her. "Probably." "Good," Emma said, and the adult weariness in her voice was heartbreaking. "I'm tired of keeping secrets." Maya pulled out her phone, but before she could dial, she heard the front door open downstairs. Her blood turned to ice as Carol's voice drifted up from the foyer. "We're home. How did everything go?" Maya grabbed Emma's hand. "We need to get out of here. Right now." But Emma pulled back. "I can't leave Sophie." "Emma, listen to me very carefully," Maya whispered urgently. "Sophie would want you to be safe. She would want you to get help. The best way to take care of Sophie now is to let the right people know what happened to her." Footsteps were coming up the stairs. Maya made a split-second decision and pushed the closet door closed, her stomach churning as she did it. Then she grabbed Emma and pulled her toward the window. "Maya," Carol's voice was closer now, just outside the bedroom door. "Is Emma asleep?" "We're fine," Maya called out, trying to keep her voice steady while she struggled with the window latch. "Emma's getting ready for bed." The window finally opened, and Maya looked down at the drop to the backyard. It was only one story, but it would be a hard landing. She turned to Emma, who was watching her with those two old eyes. "I need you to trust me," Maya whispered. "Can you climb out this window?" Emma nodded. Without hesitation, she swung her legs over the sill and dropped down to the grass below, landing with surprising grace. Maya followed, landing hard and twisting her ankle but managing to stay on her feet. They ran across the backyard and through a gap in the hedge that separated the Richardson property from their neighbors. Maya could hear Carol calling for them from inside the house, her voice growing more frantic. "Maya, Emma, where are you?" Maya and Emma crouched behind a row of garbage cans in the neighbor's driveway. Maya's hands were shaking so badly she could barely work her phone, but she managed to dial 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "I need to report a murder," Maya said, her voice barely steady. 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. There's a body hidden in a child's bedroom closet, and the parents are home. I have their 8-year-old daughter with me. She's a witness." "Ma'am, did you say there's a body?" "Yes, a teenage girl named Sophie Richardson. She's been dead for months, but her parents told everyone she went to college. Her little sister she's been taking care of the body because her parents threatened her not to tell anyone." Maya could hear the dispatcher typing rapidly. "Ma'am, are you and the child in immediate danger?" "I think so. The parents just came home and found us gone. They don't know we know about Sophie. Units are being dispatched to your location. Can you get to a safe place and stay on the line?" Maya looked around the dark neighborhood. "We're hiding behind 1245 Maple Ridge Drive, but I don't think we should stay here." She could hear car doors slamming in the distance and voices calling Emma's name. David and Carol were searching for them. "Emma," Maya whispered, "is there anywhere nearby where you feel safe? A neighbor you trust?" Emma pointed down the street. "Mrs. Peterson. She gave me cookies when Sophie went missing. She asked me lots of questions about whether I was okay." They crept through backyards, staying low and moving as quietly as possible. Maya could hear the Richardsons calling for Emma, their voices carrying a note of desperation that hadn't been there before. They knew something was wrong. Mrs. Peterson's house was a small ranch style with a garden gnome collection that Emma had obviously noticed before. Maya rang the doorbell, keeping Emma close behind her. A woman in her 60s answered the door wearing a bathrobe and looking concerned. "Emma? Honey, what are you doing out here so late, and who are you?" "I'm Maya, Emma's babysitter. Mrs. Peterson, we need help. Emma's in danger, and I've called the police, but—" Mrs. Peterson's expression grew serious as she took in Maya's disheveled appearance and Emma's frightened face. "Come inside, both of you." She ushered them into her living room and locked the door behind them. "Emma, sweetie, are you hurt?" Emma shook her head but moved closer to Maya. "Mrs. Peterson, did you really think something bad happened to Sophie?" The older woman's face went pale. "Emma, what are you talking about?" "She never went to college," Emma said simply. "She's been in my closet the whole time. Daddy killed her and Mommy helped him hide it." Mrs. Peterson sank into a chair, her hand over her heart. "Oh my God. Oh Emma, you sweet child. I knew something was wrong. I called child services twice because you looked so thin and scared. But your parents always had explanations." Through the front window, Maya could see police cars arriving at the Richardson house, their red and blue lights painting the quiet street in urgent color. Within minutes, the neighborhood was swarming with patrol cars, an ambulance, and what looked like a crime scene van. Maya's phone rang, the 911 dispatcher checking on their location. Soon, there was a knock at Mrs. Peterson's door and 2 police officers were asking to speak with Maya and Emma. The next few hours passed in a blur of questions, medical examinations and statements. Emma was remarkably composed as she told her story to a specially trained child psychologist, explaining in matter-of-fact detail how she had discovered Sophie's body the morning after her death and how her parents had convinced her that keeping the secret was the only way to protect their family. Maya learned that Sophie had been 15, not college-aged as the parents had claimed to neighbors. She had apparently discovered something on her father's computer. The investigation would later reveal a cache of embezzled funds from his accounting firm and threatened to report him. The confrontation had escalated when Sophie tried to leave the house, and David Richardson had grabbed her to stop her. The injury to her neck had been fatal, whether intentional or accidental. Rather than call for help, the parents had staged the scene to look like suicide, then changed their story to neighbors, claiming Sophie had left for early admission to college. They had been living with their daughter's body in the house for 6 months, while 8-year-old Emma maintained her vigil, bringing offerings and standing guard because she believed Sophie's spirit needed her protection. The parents never touched the body after the first night, the lead detective explained to Maya while Emma was being interviewed. The little girl has been the only one caring for the scene. She's been bringing fresh flowers twice a week, changing the water, writing notes. In her mind, she was taking care of her sister. Maya wiped away tears. She thought Sophie was lonely. She thought if she left, Sophie would be scared. Kids that age don't understand death the way adults do, the detective said. In Emma's mind, her sister was still there, still needing her. The parents exploited that innocence to keep her quiet. As dawn broke over Maple Ridge Drive, David and Carol Richardson were led away in handcuffs. David was charged with manslaughter and tampering with evidence. Carol faced charges of accessory after the fact and child endangerment. Both would eventually plead guilty and receive substantial prison sentences. Emma was placed in the temporary custody of Child Protective Services, though Mrs. Peterson had already volunteered to be considered as a foster placement. The little girl had finally been freed from her terrible vigil, but Maya knew the real healing was just beginning. As Maya gave her final statement to police, she kept thinking about Emma's words. Now, you know why I can't leave her alone. Her 8-year-old child had spent 6 months believing she was the only thing standing between her dead sister and abandonment. She had sacrificed her childhood, her sleep, her sanity to keep a promise no child should ever have to make. The secret that had been hidden behind that closet door was finally exposed, but Maya understood that some doors, once opened, could never truly be closed again. Emma would carry the weight of those months for the rest of her life, just as Maya would carry the image of what she had found in that closet. But at least now, Emma wouldn't have to carry it alone. 3 days after that terrible night, Maya sat in the waiting room of the Riverside County Child Advocacy Center, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh glare that made the cheerful children's artwork on the walls look garish and surreal. She hadn't slept properly since opening that closet door. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sophie's preserved form hanging in the darkness, and she heard Emma's matter-of-fact voice explaining how she'd been taking care of her dead sister for 6 months. The image haunted her waking hours, too. She'd find herself checking her own closets compulsively, unable to shake the feeling that something might be hiding in the shadows. "Miss Restrepo?" A woman in her 40s approached, wearing a badge that identified her as Detective Linda Santos. "Thank you for coming in. I know this has been difficult for you." Maya stood, grateful for something to focus on besides her own trauma. "How is Emma doing?" "Better than we expected, honestly. She's been placed with Mrs. Peterson temporarily, and she seems to be adjusting well. The child psychologist says Emma has remarkable resilience, though she'll need extensive therapy." Detective Santos gestured toward a small conference room. "We have some questions about the night you discovered the body. There are details that don't quite add up, and we're hoping you can help us understand the timeline better." Maya followed her into the room where another detective was reviewing a thick file. He introduced himself as Detective Marcus Chen, the lead investigator on what was now officially known as the Sophie Richardson homicide case. "We've been piecing together what happened over the past 6 months," Detective Chen said, spreading several photographs across the table. Maya was relieved to see they were crime scene photos of the bedroom, not of Sophie herself. "What we're finding suggests this cover-up was much more elaborate than we initially thought." "What do you mean?" Maya asked. Detective Santos pulled out a folder. "We've been interviewing neighbors, teachers, Emma's pediatrician, family friends. The parents created an entire fabricated story about Sophie leaving for college early admission to Stanford. They had fake acceptance letters, fake dormitory assignments, even fake tuition bills they showed to relatives. David Richardson is a CPA," Detective Chen added. He knows how to create convincing financial documents. They told everyone Sophie was doing so well academically that she'd been accepted into an accelerated program that started in February. They even sent fake text messages from Sophie's phone to relatives, pretending she was settling into college life. Maya felt sick, while Emma was standing guard over her sister's body. Exactly. And that's where the story gets even more disturbing. Detective Santos leaned forward. Emma told us she tried to tell people what really happened several times in those first few weeks. She told her teacher at school that Sophie was sleeping in the closet and wouldn't wake up. She told the school nurse that her parents were lying about Sophie going to college. She even tried to tell a neighbor who asked about Sophie. What happened when she tried to tell? The parents convinced everyone that Emma was having trouble adjusting to Sophie leaving and was creating fantasy stories to cope. They took her to a child psychologist, not the one she's seeing now, but a different one, who diagnosed her with adjustment disorder and recommended that adults not feed into Emma's fantasies by discussing them. Maya stared at the detectives. So when Emma tried to tell the truth, everyone thought she was lying? Worse than that, Detective Chen said. The parents used the psychological evaluation to manipulate Emma. They told her that the doctor said if she kept telling stories, she would be sent away to a hospital where she couldn't take care of Sophie anymore. They convinced her that her silence was the only thing protecting both Sophie and their family. The calculated cruelty of it made Maya feel nauseated. They weaponized her love for her sister. Exactly, and it gets more complicated. Detective Santos pulled out another document. We've been going through David Richardson's financial records. He wasn't just embezzling from his accounting firm, he was running an elaborate Ponzi scheme using his clients' investment portfolios. Sophie discovered it by accident when she was using his computer for a school project. How much money are we talking about? Nearly $2 million over 3 years. He was about to be audited, which would have exposed everything. Sophie's threat to report him would have meant immediate arrest and the collapse of the scheme. He claims he just grabbed her to stop her from leaving the house, but the forensic evidence suggests the injury was more severe than accidental force would typically cause. Maya remembered Emma's description of that night, Sophie yelling at their father about something she found on his computer, then the fight that ended in terrible silence. What's going to happen to David and Carol? Maya asked. David's been charged with second-degree murder, financial fraud, and child endangerment. Carol is facing accessory charges and child endangerment. She claimed she wanted to call police after Sophie died, but David convinced her they'd both go to prison and leave Emma with no parents at all. Do you believe that? Detective Chen shrugged. Carol definitely seems to have been under David's influence, but she also helped maintain the cover-up for 6 months. She watched her 8-year-old daughter develop what everyone thought was severe anxiety and depression, and she never once considered that maybe the fantasy Emma kept talking about was actually the truth. Detective Santos opened another folder. We want to walk you through what Emma told us about that first night and see if you noticed anything in the house that corroborates her account. Maya braced herself as Detective Santos began reading from Emma's statement, taken by the child psychologist over several sessions. Emma says she woke up around midnight on February 14th, 6 months ago, to the sound of yelling from downstairs. She went to the top of the stairs and saw Sophie and her father arguing in the kitchen. Sophie was holding some papers and saying she was going to tell everyone what you did. David grabbed Sophie's arm and Sophie tried to pull away and run toward the front door. The detective paused, looking at Maya. Emma says her father caught Sophie just as she reached the foyer and grabbed her from behind around the neck. Sophie fell forward and hit her head on the corner of the hall table. Emma heard a cracking sound, and then Sophie stopped moving. Maya closed her eyes, imagining that 8-year-old child witnessing her sister's death from the top of the stairs. Emma says she tried to run down to help Sophie, but her mother appeared and saw what had happened. Carol started screaming, and David told her to be quiet, or the neighbors would hear. Emma hid on the stairs and watched her parents carry Sophie's body upstairs. They put her in the closet that same night? No, that's where it gets more disturbing. Emma says they initially put Sophie's body on the stripped bed, Sophie's bed. They spent hours trying to figure out what to do. David kept saying they had to call it suicide, that no one would believe it was an accident. Carol kept crying and saying they should call an ambulance, but David convinced her it was too late. Detective Chen took over the narrative. According to Emma, her parents left Sophie's body on the bed for 3 days while they figured out their plan. Emma stayed in the room the entire time, talking to Sophie, bringing her water and snacks, trying to wake her up. She didn't fully understand that Sophie was dead. The parents let her do that? They were apparently too busy planning their cover-up to pay attention to what Emma was doing. They were creating the fake college documents, researching how to make a hanging look convincing, and trying to figure out how to explain Sophie's sudden disappearance to neighbors and family. Detective Santos continued reading. On the fourth night, David moved Sophie's body to the closet and staged the hanging. He told Emma that Sophie was sleeping and that she needed to be kept safe and quiet. He said if anyone found out Sophie was there, bad people would come and take both Sophie and Emma away from their parents. And Emma believed him? Emma was 8 years old and had just watched her sister die. She was traumatized, confused, and desperate to help in any way she could. When her father told her that standing guard would keep Sophie safe, she took it literally. Maya thought about Emma's vigil, how the little girl had stood in the same spot for hours at a time, bringing offerings, whispering reassurances to her dead sister. She thought she was protecting Sophie. For 6 months, Detective Chen confirmed, Emma has been living in a state of constant anxiety, believing that her vigilance was the only thing standing between her sister and some terrible fate. She's been having nightmares, panic attacks, and what her teacher described as dissociative episodes, where she would stare into space for long periods. But no one connected it to trauma. The parents convinced everyone that Emma was just struggling with Sophie leaving for college. They took her to that psychologist, who reinforced the idea that Emma's fantasies about Sophie still being in the house were a coping mechanism that would fade with time. Detective Santos pulled out a photograph of Emma's bedroom taken during the crime scene investigation. Look at this carefully. Do you notice anything that you missed the night you were babysitting? Maya studied the photo, trying to ignore the closet area that had been cordoned off with crime scene tape. The room looked different in daylight, sadder somehow. The stripped bed, the gaps on the walls where Sophie's belongings had been removed, the general sense of a space that had been partially erased. But then she noticed something else. The carpet, she said slowly. There's a worn path from the door to where Emma was standing, and another one from her spot to the closet. Exactly. The forensic team found that Emma had been walking that same route hundreds of times over 6 months. She wore a literal path into the carpet from her constant pacing between those 2 points. Maya felt tears welling up. She was wearing herself out taking care of Sophie. The pediatrician's records show Emma lost 12 pounds over the past 6 months, Detective Chen said. She was barely eating, barely sleeping. Her parents claimed she was just adjusting to being an only child, but what was really happening was that she was slowly being consumed by the responsibility they'd placed on her. Detective Santos closed the folder. Maya, we need to ask you about something Emma told us. She said that when you opened the closet door, you screamed, but then you closed it again before running. Is that accurate? Maya nodded, ashamed. I was terrified. I knew I needed to get Emma out of there, but I couldn't leave it open. It felt wrong somehow, disrespectful. Emma says that when you closed the door, you said something. She couldn't remember exactly what, but she thought you were talking to Sophie. Maya tried to remember those terrifying moments. I think I said, I'm sorry. I was apologizing to Sophie for what had happened to her, for not being able to help her sooner. Emma interpreted that as you understanding that Sophie needed the door closed to feel safe, Detective Santos explained. In her mind, you were following the same rules she'd been following, that opening the door upset Sophie, but keeping it closed kept her comfortable. The psychological complexity of what Emma had endured was staggering. Not only had she been traumatized by witnessing her sister's death, but she'd been manipulated into believing that her trauma response was actually a form of caregiving. What happens now? Maya asked. David Richardson will likely plead guilty to avoid a murder trial. Carol's attorney is negotiating a plea deal in exchange for her testimony about the cover-up. Emma will continue therapy and hopefully heal from this experience. Detective Chen leaned back in his chair. But Maya, there's something else we need to discuss. Emma has been asking for you. She wants to know if you're okay, if you were hurt by what you saw that night. Her therapist thinks it might be helpful for you two to meet under controlled circumstances. Maya's heart clenched. She's worried about me? Emma spent 6 months believing she was responsible for protecting someone she loved. Now she's worried that she failed to protect you from the same trauma she experienced. Her therapist thinks that seeing you healthy and coping might help her understand that she's not responsible for everyone's emotional well-being. The idea of seeing Emma again was both heartwarming and terrifying. Maya knew she wasn't fully processing her own trauma yet. She was still having nightmares, still checking closets compulsively, still jumping at unexpected sounds. But if it would help Emma heal, she was willing to try. "When?" she asked. "Next week, if you're ready." Emma's foster placement with Mrs. Peterson is going well, and her therapist thinks a brief supervised visit might be beneficial for both of you. As Maya left the Child Advocacy Center that afternoon, she reflected on how many lives had been shattered by David Richardson's crimes. Sophie was dead, Emma was traumatized, Carol was facing prison, and Maya herself was struggling with secondary trauma from her discovery. The ripple effects of that February night had touched everyone in the Richardsons' orbit. But there was also something else, a sense that the truth, however terrible, was finally free. Emma no longer had to stand guard over her sister's body. Sophie's death was no longer a secret burden carried by a child. The lies that had consumed their family for 6 months were finally exposed. Maya drove home to her small apartment, where she'd been staying since that night rather than returning to her dorm room. She needed space to process what had happened, and she needed to be alone with her thoughts. As she climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, she found herself automatically checking the shadows, a habit she'd developed since that night. Inside her apartment, Maya made tea and sat by her window, looking out at the ordinary suburban street where ordinary families lived ordinary lives. She thought about Emma, probably having dinner with Mrs. Peterson right now, maybe starting to remember what it felt like to be a normal 8-year-old girl instead of a keeper of terrible secrets. Tomorrow, Maya would call Emma's therapist to arrange their meeting. She would begin the process of helping both of them heal from the trauma they'd shared. But tonight, she would simply sit with the knowledge that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to keep someone else's secrets, even when breaking that silence feels like betraying the very person you're trying to protect. Emma had learned that lesson at a cost no child should ever pay. But she had learned it, and that gave Maya hope that both of them could eventually find their way back to the light. 2 weeks later, Maya sat in the carefully arranged visiting room at the Child Advocacy Center, her palms sweating as she waited for Emma to arrive. The room was designed to be non-threatening, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, toys scattered casually on low tables, and windows that looked out onto a small garden. It felt more like a living room than the sterile interview room she'd become accustomed to during the investigation. Dr. Sarah Chen, the child psychologist working with Emma, had spent an hour with Maya before this meeting, preparing her for what to expect. Emma was making remarkable progress, but she was still fragile, still processing the magnitude of what had happened to her family. "Remember, Doctor," Chen had said, "Emma has been conditioned to feel responsible for everyone's emotional well-being. She's going to want to take care of you, to make sure you're not hurt by what you experienced. Try to let her express that concern, but also show her that adults can handle difficult emotions without falling apart." The door opened, and Mrs. Peterson entered with Emma. Maya's first thought was how different the little girl looked. Gone was the hollow-eyed child in the stained nightgown who had stood vigil over her sister's body. This Emma wore clean jeans and a bright yellow sweater. Her hair was brushed and pulled back with butterfly clips, and there was color in her cheeks. She looked like what she was, a normal 8-year-old girl. But when Emma saw Maya, her expression immediately became serious, concerned. She walked over slowly, studying Maya's face with those two perceptive eyes. "Are you okay?" Emma asked without preamble. "After you saw Sophie, did you have bad dreams?" Maya felt her throat tighten. Even now, Emma's first concern was for someone else's well-being. "I did have some bad dreams," Maya said honestly. "But I've been talking to someone about them just like you've been talking to Dr. Chen. The dreams are getting better." Emma nodded gravely. "I had bad dreams about Sophie for a long time. But Dr. Chen taught me that dreams can't hurt you, even when they feel scary." Mrs. Peterson settled into a chair nearby, but far enough away to give them privacy. Dr. Chen had positioned herself where she could observe, but not interfere unless necessary. "Emma," Maya said, "I wanted to see you because I've been worried about you too. I wanted to make sure you were safe and happy." "I am," Emma said, and for the first time, Maya heard genuine lightness in her voice. "Mrs. Peterson makes really good pancakes, and she has a cat named Whiskers who sleeps on my bed, and I go to a new school where nobody knows about what happened." "That sounds wonderful." Emma sat down in the chair across from Maya, but she perched on the edge like she might need to leave quickly. "Maya, I want to tell you something important." "What's that?" "Sophie isn't in the closet anymore." Maya's heart clenched. She knew that Sophie's body had been removed by the coroner's office and that funeral services had finally been held. A real funeral this time, where Sophie could be properly mourned by the people who loved her. But she wondered if Emma truly understood what that meant. "Where is Sophie now?" Maya asked gently. "She's buried in the cemetery next to Grandma Richardson," Emma said. "Mrs. Peterson took me to visit, and we brought flowers. Real flowers from her garden, not the fake ones I used to buy at the grocery store." Maya remembered seeing those grocery store flowers among the offerings Emma had left in the closet. How did it feel to visit Sophie there? Emma was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "Different," she said finally. "When she was in the closet, I felt like she was scared and cold and lonely. But at the cemetery, she felt peaceful, like she was sleeping somewhere safe instead of hiding somewhere dark." "That's a very wise way to think about it. Dr. Chen says Sophie was never really in the closet anyway. She says Sophie died that night when Daddy hurt her, and what I was taking care of was just her body, like an empty house after someone moves away." Maya marveled at how Dr. Chen had found a way to explain death to Emma that honored her protective instincts while helping her understand reality. "What do you think about that?" "I think it's true," Emma said. "Because sometimes when I was standing there watching, I didn't feel like Sophie was really there. I felt like I was waiting for something, but I didn't know what." "What were you waiting for?" Emma's answer was immediate and clear. For someone to tell the truth. The simple honesty of it made Maya's eyes fill with tears. Emma had been standing guard not just over her sister's body, but over the truth itself, waiting for someone to care enough to discover what had really happened. "Emma, you were so brave," Maya said. "Even when you were scared, even when your parents told you not to tell anyone, you kept taking care of Sophie. You made sure she wasn't forgotten." "But I didn't tell anyone what really happened," Emma said, a note of guilt creeping into her voice. "I kept the secret for so long." "You were 8 years old, and you were protecting your family the only way you knew how. That's not your fault. That's what children do when adults put them in impossible situations." Dr. Chen had coached Maya on this conversation. It was crucial that Emma understand she wasn't responsible for keeping her parents' secret or for eventually breaking it. The guilt she carried was a burden no child should bear. "Emma, can I tell you something that might sound strange?" Emma nodded. "I think Sophie was proud of you for taking such good care of her. But I also think she would want you to take care of yourself now. She would want you to be a regular kid who plays and laughs and doesn't have to worry about grown-up problems." "Dr. Chen says that too," Emma said. "She says Sophie would want me to make friends and learn new things, and maybe get a pet of my own someday. What do you think about that?" For the first time since Maya had known her, Emma smiled, a real, genuine 8-year-old smile. "I think I'd like a kitten. Mrs. Peterson says maybe for my birthday next month, if I'm ready for the responsibility." The irony wasn't lost on Maya. Emma had shouldered impossible responsibility for 6 months, and now she was being offered age-appropriate responsibility as a path back to childhood. They talked for another hour, with Emma gradually relaxing as she realized Maya wasn't going to break down or need taking care of. She told Maya about her new school, her friend Jessica who liked to draw horses, and how she was learning to play chess with Mrs. Peterson. She seemed lighter with each topic, as if talking about normal childhood experiences was helping her remember who she was beyond the traumatic events that had defined her life for so long. "Maya," Emma said as their visit was winding down, "are you going to keep babysitting?" The question caught Maya off guard. She'd been so focused on Emma's healing that she hadn't really considered her own future. The truth was, she wasn't sure she could handle being alone in someone else's house with their children, at least not yet. "I don't know," Maya said honestly. "I might need some time before I'm ready for that again." Emma nodded understandingly. "That's okay. Taking care of kids is hard work. You should only do it when you feel strong enough." Again, Maya was struck by Emma's wisdom and maturity. This child had learned lessons about emotional boundaries and self-care that many adults never mastered. As their visit ended, Emma hugged Maya, a quick, spontaneous gesture that felt like forgiveness and gratitude wrapped together. "Thank you for opening the door," Emma whispered. "I couldn't do it by myself, but I wanted someone to know the truth." Maya hugged her back, careful not to hold on too tightly. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth." After Emma and Mrs. Peterson left, Maya stayed to debrief with Dr. Chen. "How do you think she's really doing?" Maya asked. "Better than I expected, honestly. Emma has remarkable resilience, but she also has some advantages that will help her heal. She's intelligent, she has a strong sense of right and wrong, and most importantly, she's now in a stable, loving environment where she's allowed to be a child. What about the trauma? Will she be okay long term?" Dr. Chen considered the question carefully. "Emma will always carry the memory of what happened, but I don't think it will define her. She's already showing signs of post-traumatic growth. She's more empathetic than most children her age. She has a strong sense of justice, and she's learned that she can survive incredibly difficult circumstances. With continued therapy and support, I think she'll not only recover, but thrive." And the nightmares? The anxiety? Much improved. Emma's anxiety was largely situational. She was terrified of what would happen if she stopped standing guard over Sophie. Now that the secret is out, and Sophie has been properly laid to rest, Emma's stress levels have dropped dramatically. She's sleeping through the night, eating normally and engaging in age-appropriate activities. Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She'd been carrying guilt about Emma's welfare, wondering if her decision to open that closet door had somehow made things worse for the little girl. "Maya," Dr. Chen said, "Emma isn't the only one who experienced trauma that night. How are you doing with your own healing?" Maya had been in therapy since the incident, working through what mental health professionals called vicarious trauma, the psychological impact of witnessing someone else's traumatic experience. The nightmares were less frequent now, and she'd stopped compulsively checking closets, but she still felt changed by what she'd seen. "Better," Maya said, "but I don't think I'll ever be quite the same person I was before." That's not necessarily a bad thing. Trauma can be transformative in positive ways too. You showed incredible courage that night, and you saved a child who had been suffering in silence for months. That's something to be proud of. Maya left the Child Advocacy Center feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Seeing Emma healthy and happy had helped heal something inside her that she hadn't even realized was broken. 6 months later, Maya received a card in the mail. It was decorated with crayon drawings of cats and flowers, and inside, in careful third-grade handwriting, Emma had written, "Dear Maya, thank you for helping me and Sophie. I got a kitten for my birthday. Her name is Luna, and she's black with white paws. Mrs. Peterson is going to adopt me officially next month. I hope you are happy and taking good care of yourself. Love, Emma P.S. Dr. Chen says it's okay to be sad sometimes, but also okay to be happy. I'm learning to be both." Maya kept that card on her refrigerator for years, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying moments in our lives can lead to the most profound healing. Emma had taught her that children are far more resilient than adults give them credit for, and that the truth, however painful, is always preferable to the most comfortable lie. The Richardson case made headlines for several weeks. David Richardson was sentenced to 25 years to life for second-degree murder and financial fraud. Carol Richardson received 8 years for accessory after the fact and child endangerment, though she was released after serving 5 with good behavior. The embezzlement scheme had defrauded clients of nearly $2 million, money that was never fully recovered. But for Maya, the real story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the transformation of a little girl who had been trapped in silence and fear, forced to carry secrets too heavy for her small shoulders. Emma's journey from that haunted child standing vigil in a dark bedroom to a thriving 9-year-old with a kitten and loving adoptive mother was a testament to the human capacity for healing. Maya eventually did return to babysitting, though she was more selective about the families she worked with and always trusted her instincts when something felt wrong. She finished college with a degree in social work and went on to specialize in working with children who had experienced trauma. Her first case, she often told her colleagues, had taught her that sometimes the most important thing you can do for a child is simply listen to what they're trying to tell you, even when they're saying it without words. Emma grew up to be a remarkable young woman, compassionate, strong, and unafraid to speak truth to power. She became a victim's advocate, helping other children find their voices when they'd been silenced by fear or manipulation. She often said that her sister Sophie had taught her that the dead deserve justice, but the living deserve the chance to heal. And sometimes, late at night, when Maya was having trouble sleeping, she would think about that moment when she'd turned the handle on Emma's closet door. She'd had no idea what she would find inside, but she'd opened it anyway because a child needed help and the truth needed to be told. It had been the most terrifying and important decision of her life, and she would make it again without hesitation, because some doors are meant to be opened, no matter how much we fear what lies behind them. And sometimes, opening those doors is the only way to set the truth, and the people it's been buried with finally free.